Hello, this is going to be another talk about music with my friend Stream.
Hello, that's me.
This one is going to be centered around one of my favorite musicians, Johann Sebastian Bach, who was one of the most influential conservative musicians out there, revitalized this tradition in composition, and produced, as many people may not know, like tons and tons of church music and liturgical stuff. A lot of his work was sort of centered around these Protestant churches in Arnstadt and Mulhausen and all these different places. But he was mainly a composer or cantor, I think they call it, at St. Thomas's Church, which is in Leipzig. This is where he sort of starts to produce some of his greatest works in composition for the college. So he also became a court composer for Augustus III in his later works. And by the time he died in 1750, his works were already being like reworked and composed by tons of different people. But he was, for all intents and purposes, in Germany, a superstar.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Well, I guess Bach was, what made him so prolific was his establishment in a German style. And, during Lutheranism at this time, it was a really important concept to nationalize, have a concept of a nation, just to be patriotic. And because a lot of Germany at this time was getting culture imported, especially ecclesiastically, from the Latin Church at the time and all this other stuff. So in counterpoint and Handel's other sacred and secular musics, this is all trying to center around established German styles. But the rhythms and the textures and stuff like this come from Italy and France.
Well, so, I would say it depends on the style. Bach was definitely he liked to choose foreign styles for his secular music. I'm not sure if his sacred music is the same. Partially because I have a hard time telling apart national styles and sacred music. But the secular music, he was comfortable, doing any of these.
He also composed Latin music, so it's not to say that he was focusing solely on one part. In fact, some of his greatest works comes out of Passions and Monets, and these are all composed in the Latin Church style.
Yeah.
But what's really cool in his sacred music is his adaptation of Lutheran hymns and 4-part chorals and things like this, concertos for harpsichord and things for more orchestral stuff like canons and fugues.
I would even say his chorales, the Lutheran hymns adapted to 4 voices, are, I think people don't underestimate just how important this body of his work is. It's interestingly, it's among the simpler things he writes, like in terms of style, but this is undoubtedly one of the most important things he's made. To this day, this is taught in basically any musical class, in any musical analysis or compositional school. You will at one point learn the style of the 4-part chorale. It's just that pervasive. It's also really it's a clear. Not only is it a really clear style, it's a very versatile style, and it gives a lot of room too for flexing your harmonical muscles. Since for each of these chorales, the melody is always given, usually a hymn of some kind or a popular song. It's entirely an exercise in great harmony writing and voice leading, but just to say, like part writing for each of the voices. That's
right.
Yeah, and it's it's also one of the things that even now, even like despite like lots of Baroque music sounding weird to modern ears, his chorales, if you just like listen to him straight up, you know, even if you're not really used to it, it's even now it sounds really good on the ear for, I would say, for the majority of people, even though they don't really have much to do with Baroque music. Definitely, in my opinion, one of the pinnacles of this.
Yeah, I agree. And this will eventually transition into sort of an analysis on his passions, which I think most people agree is probably his greatest work.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I think we can infer from Bach's decisions that he himself thought his passions and his mass were the greatest works he's done, because you know, in this time, preservation of music wasn't as great. You know, music was made for one occasion, and after that was usually forgotten or whatever. People didn't really bother keeping it as much unless it was like really good. So Bach did this thing where some of his best stuff that he liked a lot, he reused in greater works because he hoped it would preserve it more. And there's a few examples I know myself of him reusing music, but not in the Passion, sadly.
What examples are those?
Well, one of the most famous examples is there is this really grand Passacaglia from Buxtehude. Buxtehude was a North German composer, a little bit older than Bach. Like, you know, he lived at the same time, but I'm saying like he's like a generation prior, and he wrote in this really like specifically Northern German organ style. Probably not that noticeable for most people, but if you really listen to like organ music, you can tell it has its own flavor, its own color. Bach really admired Buxtehude. It was one of his you know, idols. Is that a phrase? You know, one of the people he looked up to a lot. So he traveled there, and he actually went there just to listen to Buxtehude. And one of the pieces of Buxtehude that are really like that cemented themselves in the musical sphere is his Passacaglia in D minor. It has a very noticeable bass line, and later on Bach went on to write a Passacaglia that is very similar, in some respects. The bass line, for example, is like it's very clearly in. It's not a direct copy. Like, I want to be careful here without using too much musical jargon, but you can tell it's. If you put them side by side, it's very obvious Bach like took it and modified it for his own flavor. Even a few of the first like parts in the variations from Buxtehude's Passacaglia, Bach imitated in his own way in his Passacaglia. So I think that's one of like the best examples I know.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I know a bit about Buxtehude. Is that he used to take lessons from him, and Johann Reichen.
Oh, Reinken. Yeah, I actually haven't heard this name before.
Those apparently were his two teachers.
Oh.
Actually, people might have this image of Bach of being this very posh, polite type dude, but he was actually very really passionate about music, like intensely passionate. And there's even the story where he was dissatisfied with one of his fellow musicians, a guy named Geyersbach, and he essentially called him effeminate, a word I can't say, but like a weenie bassoonist, or like an effeminate type of bassoonist. And then you know, after that day, after the lesson, he came out with a stick and tried to beat him. You know, so Bach would often be very heavily criticizing these people who he viewed as not taking music seriously, or being too elitist, or being too stupid about composing music, and he would often criticize and correct them, to the point where he had to be you know, armed with like a knife on him whenever he would be composing.
We don't have much of his direct personal writings, so it's hard to like see what his personality is. But I think that's one of the clearest things that shines through everything he does. He loved excellency in craft, for sure, whether it would be applied to himself or to other people.
Yeah, he was definitely a perfectionist. Bach was a pioneer in the musical sphere at the time, but
Absolutely.
not in a way of like Mozart, where Mozart is sort of going for a more enthusiastical appeal, going for an easy listen, uh, doing operas and things like that, very eccentric type things.
Oh yes.
Bach is much more reserved, but not in a way where it's sort of complacent. It's Bach's pieces are incredibly dynamic, but in a very traditional conservative way. And he really does touch on every space and piece of music in a very cool and if you look at the composition, it's really unexplainably amazing. It'll be simple notes, but it'll be put in such a way where there's unexplainable type of ascension when you read when you listen to it.
Absolutely agree. I think one of the clearest, like talking about Bach's taste in music, let's say, one of the most like noticeable things from his entire output is that he never once wrote a single opera, even though the opera was the most popular genre at the time. We can see this with his contemporary, Georg Friedrich Händel. Händel was basically the same age as Bach, was much, much more famous during his lifetime, traveled in all of Europe, was famous in England, in France, and Germany. And Handel wrote 51 operas. But Bach has he has not even, like, the closest thing to an opera he has would be his secular cantatas, like his coffee cantata. But that really isn't an opera. Like there's no Greek drama or modern drama. It's like a short little comedy at best.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that is like when we say traditional and like conservative, there'll be images in your mind of just like straight music, but the keen eye or the keen ear can really hear comedy written in, and especially with like things like the Coffee House Opera, like you said.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the most, like, let's say the highest peak that comedy had just in musical form, I would place with Haydn and Mozart. Haydn especially, his quartets are filled. I think there's not a single one that doesn't have at least a few humorous moments. Haydn was a cheeky little guy. He was actively trying to make you laugh listening to his stuff, among other things, of course. I think Bach can do humor really well, but he doesn't do it really often at all. He's much more interested in, let's say, the crazy harmonic interplays or contrapunctal tricks that he can display. This is a hard thing to like find analogies for, but I guess Bach is just oftentimes really also trying to be super impressive, even though you might not even notice that he is doing that. I'm not sure if he's doing this even really for the audience or even himself. He just does this a lot. It almost feels like it just pours out of him with how often he does this. Most of his pieces, even if they're really, really simple, have some weird hidden mechanism in them that make you wonder whether or not musicologists have schizophrenia or if Bach had like mega autism.
Yeah.
For example, in the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1, the first prelude in C major, one of the most overplayed compositions in all of history. Every student has played this at least once. I think even people who don't listen to classical music have heard it at least once. And the things that happen in this piece are crazy. Like, from the surface level, yeah, the harmony goes pretty far for being like in C major. It's pretty intense in the middle part, in the second, let's say, no, not movement isn't the correct word. Let's just say the middle part of it. But also something on further inspection that you might notice is that the two lower voices, like the entire piece is playing arpeggios, right? And the first two notes that you hear at all times are actually a canon with another, which is honestly imperceptible. I'd never noticed this until I just read it somewhere. It's a canon hidden in there, in this really weird shape that you don't normally have canons in, especially not in this form of a free prelude. It's so sneaky, and it's like, it doesn't sound impressive. It's just impressive that when you look, that it's there. And not only that, apparently I have a hard time actually understanding this. Apparently he hid numerology in this piece too. Like his name shows up in terms of if you count the measures, things like this. In this, still talking about the same piece here. And these kind of things happen all across the board of Bach's music. I think there's only one piece that I could pinpoint where he just kind of like lets loose, so to say, and that would be the recorded improvisation of his, where he just improvised and someone wrote it down. That's his chromatic fantasy. That one sounds technically demanding. It's like kind of flashy and everything, but that one doesn't really have any of the like interesting subtleties or weird hidden parts to it that most of his other music has, even if it's imperceptible.
Yeah, there's the principle where, once you learn the rules, you can break the rules.
Yeah.
But Bach doesn't do that at all. Bach is so cool about, and what Chopin I think is so cool about, and why they're like my favorite, is because they have such a rich understanding of music that they can use the simplicity of simple notes. But since they have such a wide range of how the notes interplay when you listen into the ear and how it feels into the heart and how it mediates through, he can do so much with just the composition.
Exactly.
And that sort of dynamicism is what we're talking about. It's why it's so incredible, and it's not something you can really explain unless you are hearing it yourself.
This dynamicism is hard to explain for two reasons. First of all, it requires actually an understanding of the form, which is to say, the reason why things are done in a certain way. And on the other hand, also understanding that, the form itself isn't lively. It's just a mold. I guess that maybe language could be a way to understand it, because you can't just randomly start making up new words. That's just gibberish, and no one will understand what you're saying. But on the other hand, if you just pronounced everything exactly as written, you would also sound a little silly. This is a very basic analogy. I'm not sure it does it quite justice, but this is just to help illustrate this point about this need of interplay here. And what you said about them not breaking the rules, I don't think Bach breaks the rules, but I do think he bends them. He goes extremely far with how willing he is to tear the rules into little pieces without, okay, that wasn't the correct phrase to use there, but he keeps the rules, but he subjects them to the most weird and unconventional situations. It really is fascinating. I think
you can see his free flow of thought in the music.
Yeah,
and hearing.
I think that's one of the most striking things, is how different single Bach pieces can sound from one another. Even I feel like I could make, if I put time into it, I could make a spectrum of Bach pieces, just covering different things he does or uses. So it's extremely hard to pin down. He really has this little microcosm of Western music, because he likes making the sacred music, the chorales, obviously, but he likes making those funky little dance collections, the suites, the partitas, and he freely makes use of those Italian or French dances in them. He even makes use of some less known, more obscure dance forms sometimes, like a shavot. I'm not sure if it's pronounced gavot or shavot.
Right, yeah.
Mozart, I don't think he wrote a shavot. I haven't checked, so if this is incorrect, I'm sorry. But in later times, even Beethoven, Mozart, they wrote minuets, they wrote scherzos. I think they probably have written a courant maybe. But I don't know. Maybe this is a style thing. Oh yeah, about that too. During like the later years of Bach, the galant style was getting more and more prominent. You were moving away from this complex contrapuntal work of the earlier century. You were going to this more simplified style where it was immediate and easy to understand. But they tried to rely on other aspects, to keep the music engaging. I personally don't really like this style. This is what the later, comes into Mozart's music most of all. It's really it's in the spirit of the classicism, which has this obsession with the clear, clean, simple forms, like the Greek temples. Like instead of these like ornate Baroque churches, they really wanted these like clean, clear Greek temple building type things, and but for music.
Yeah, and I think Bach was definitely sort of against this sort of classicist idea.
Definitely. I'm not aware of anything that Bach has written that could classify as that. With one single exception that I think is borderline, but that's still borderline. And he's besides that, he has actually tried to master all of the styles available to him that were floating around. Actually incredible the things he's made. I think on pure accident, just because he was messing around, he was getting close to sounds that would even like seem kind of modern to us. For example, in the Well-Tempered Clavier again, the fugue in B minor of the chromatic scale, which is 12 notes. It makes use of 11 for the theme. This is like some kind of proto-Schoenbergian. Sorry, what's that called again? 12-tone row, right? Some proto-dodecaphony. And he uses that not as a, he uses it very differently to Schoenberg and his 12-tone rows, but he definitely, undoubtedly makes use of something that's really similar to that, but just for the theme. And that's definitely a very weird thing to do at the time. I think that's one example of him like really stretching the available musical language and like trying to make something great out of it.
Right.
I think then there's also instances of him doing the opposite, where he's like almost going back in terms of style, that is, where his music sounds almost like more Renaissance than it does super Baroque. I think, for example, the art of the fugue, I think, would be a good example of this. At least the last fugue in that it's a very different sound to what he normally does in his contrapunctal stuff.
Yeah, and that was actually my first real exposure to listening to Bach regularly, which I thought was like, oh, well, this is totally like a Renaissance guy. I understand why he's like a revolutionary now, not knowing the rest of his corpus. Yeah, so that was like my first impression.
You listened to the art of the fugue first?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Damn, that's like beginning with calculus and then moving to like.
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much yeah.
To like multiplication tables. Oh man, I think that's definitely still probably in my top 3 of things he's written. I really like the art of the fugue, not only because he shows just how incredibly like potent a single theme can be and how it can be transformed and changed in different ways, but also just because I think the music is like really nice to listen to. Yeah, even in the most superficial way, I find it incredibly enjoyable.
And that's one of the hardest things to do, is to make the really cool, like revolutionary music, and then make it like good to listen to. Because some people, they'll try to find ways to do that completely through enthusiasm, and then go the more liberal route of making like a total stuff for entertainment, and it totally loses the form of what music is supposed to be, and it just sounds terrible. Exactly. And then you have to cope and say that it totally sounds good.
Yeah, they love doing this thing where I notice this a lot in the arts, people will say they like or dislike a piece of art or music or whatever just based on if they can recognize the spirit behind it and if they agree with it. Like, for example, let's a really stupid example, but let's take these clean corporate thing. You know the look with like the no outlines, really simple shapes, people with weird proportions, pastel colors.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that's almost no one likes that, but people go out of their way to use it because they know what it signifies. And that goes for a lot of art. I think this is even noticeable back in the day. I'm not saying this is some kind of new thing. It was probably less prominent back when the arts were more similar. But I think this is definitely a possibility within Bach's time too, especially with things like opera, which was, you know, I'm assuming Bach would probably regard operas as kind of like quasi-pagan because they were so much about like displaying Greek myths. But that's a speculation. Sure. That's a speculation. I'm not sure if that's actually what he would have thought.
I think it just a lot of people looked down upon opera during this time.
Yeah.
It was unpopular with like the rulers who were commissioning musicians and things like this.
I think that's really funny because now like going to opera is like, oh, that's like a super trad like thing. Like, wow, it's like so conservative. When you listen to like Mozart's Magical Flute, wow, dude, you're like super trad. And then you look at the Magical Flute and it's like, this is just Marvel from like the 1700s. This is what Marvel was back then. I mean, it's definitely more highbrow. Don't get me wrong. It's not like super lowbrow, but I'm saying like the psychology behind it is.
Yeah.
It's the same.
It's the same. The Catholics, sometimes they have like opera masses and they don't see any problem with it.
What? Do they actually?
Oh, you didn't know this? Yeah.
I didn't know this.
There's opera masses and it always freaks out the trads because, well, for good reason, because, you know, opera is basically just an entertainment play.
That's like if you had like, that's actually just like having a Disney or Marvel mass with the priest like reenacting like Thor and like Loki or whatever, Iron Man. Yeah. That's kind of, you have to get in the minds of people. The difference is, of course, the Greek myths actually do have like some great fundamental value to them, especially in how they're connected to our nations. However, from the perspective of people who were going to these operas, this is just big entertainment. They weren't looking for like great insights there. It was just like flashy and special, like cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell me your favorite Bach piece?
I think that's a difficult challenge, but just for my, but because you asked for my personal taste, I'm going to go with his C minor Passacaglia, which he wrote when he was, I think, 21 or 22. I really love this piece. I've talked about it earlier when comparing it to Buxtehude.
Yeah.
And that actually is my favorite piece. I found it on accident one time on YouTube. And I remember when I listened to it, it's in 3/4 time. And because it's in 3/4 time, I instantly associated it with the ballroom. And I was like confused. What is this like dark music in 3/4 time? I was imagining like people in masks and like dark black dresses like spinning around under like evil chandeliers. It was weird. My first this is weird. This is interesting because when you're not familiar with the vocabulary, or with a different vocabulary rather, the effect these pieces have on you is so different. And I was intrigued by the sound at first because what is this like evil dance music? It's not dance music at all, by the way. 3/4 time is not historically associated with dance until actually around Bach's time, maybe. Because beforehand, actually in the Middle Ages, I'm talking about the 1200s here, 3/4 time was just actually like the standard meter. That's what most music, especially sacred music, was in because of the Trinity. And it being in 3 is like more better than. It was called tempus perfectus. If it's in 3/part time, no, not part, whatever the special term for it is. And what we call common time now was called tempus imperfectus, which I think is really funny because that's now the opposite. Common time is 4/4, symmetrical and not Trinitarian, evil and Satanic. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because of this association, I had this like interest in this piece, and I began listening to it. At first, it was kind of jarring. Actually, it's a very complicated piece, but one thing it has going for itself, which makes it actually super good for people to listen to it who aren't that into Baroque, is that it has a constantly repeating and unaltered bass line, which is called the it's called the basso ostinato, the obstinate bass in English, which is really good because unlike in a fugue, the theme merges and it changes and it undergoes transformations.
Yeah, it's episodic.
Yeah, it's well, the Passacaglia is episodic too, but with the fugue, it's more complicated because there are times when the theme isn't present and the theme can be inaudible. It can be changed too much for a newbie to actually notice it. With the Passacaglia, you have the advantage every single second of the piece, the theme is audible, and around 90% of the time, it's also audible really, really clearly because mostly it's in the bass, mostly it retains the same rhythm, and when it isn't, it usually is in a different, very noticeable place, and that ties it together really nicely for listening. And then with the same theme repeating, going through these crazy variations, it's just amazing. I love listening to it so much. It begins with this little back and forth with the other voices on top, and then it goes when it develops, it changes into this really cool sweeping gesture where first the notes are all ascending upwards for the duration of the theme, and then on the next repetition, all the notes are descending down the scale all the time while the theme plays. And then after that, it's both at the same time with this crazy cascade. And then after that, more different plays on it. And then at the grand finale, you have not only do you have really large block chords appearing, the last part of it has like perpetual playing, which sounds so impressive. He actually uses a very simple pattern there, where he plays the right hand, then left hand, then right hand, then left hand again and again. But because you don't hear it initially that there's pauses on the right and the left hand, so it just sounds like perpetual playing. This like whirlwind of sound. I really like that. It's my favorite piece. There's so much happening in it, and then. Yeah, once it climaxes, the Passacaglia's climax is also like super dark, but then the fugue after the Passacaglia comes a fugue with the same theme. That one sounds way more like triumphant and hopeful, in stark contrast to the Passacaglia. So it's like if you just listen to it as one thing as well, I think that's definitely the intended form. But it's also it's so uplifting. Really, it's crazy. I love that.
Yeah, I think with most of Bach's work, you just have to sit your white ass down and listen.
Really,
The whole thing.
Yeah, my biggest recommendation for listening to Bach, which might probably be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's re-listening to pieces. The first time listening to a piece will probably be slightly confusing. If you're not used to it, it will be very confusing. It definitely takes like a full re-listen of the whole thing, like at least 2 more times to like, starting to get it. Unless you're just like super used to it like I am, where, I mean, I'm studying this type of music. I can almost replicate Bach's sound. Well, not great, but I feel like I could fool most people, I'm sure. It's definitely one of these things where it really depends what you're focusing on. There are more accessible and less accessible Bach pieces.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. The least accessible ones, I definitely think, are also some of the most enjoyable ones, being the super complex contrapuntal ones, sadly. Those are especially his organ fugues are super complex. The fugues in the Well-Tempered Clavier too, super complex, very inaccessible. But they're also some of my favorites. I think, my favorite fugue is still the one from The Art of the Fugue, the very last one, the unfinished fugue. Because it's a triple fugue. It has 3 themes that get introduced, which is it's definitely not easy to notice them at all unless you are keeping track or re-listening to it multiple times. And then on the other hand, the most accessible ones, I think his preludes are usually pretty accessible because they don't, I mean, it's hard to call it a theme. It's not like a melody that repeats like we're used to it, but it's this kind of segment that's dominating the music, and that's, for example, like an upwards arpeggio. And that's, it sticks in the mind. It's easy to comprehend, and it's more accessible for sure.
My favorite thing that Bach has written, and this is going to be the normie take, but my favorite is St. John's Passion.
Actually, I have 100% respect for that. I absolutely love the St. John's Passion as well, especially the very first segment of it. It blows you away. When the choir joins in, it's just like such a wake up call. I really love that.
Yeah. So St. John's Passion, for those who don't know, it was written in 1724. It was the first Passion he wrote. Most people, the most popular one, I think, is St. Matthew's Passion. But this was the first one he actually composed when he was writing in St. Thomas's Church. And what it is, it's St. John's Gospel, chapters 18 and 19, and I think it has 2 verses from Matthew. But other than that, it's just the straight Gospels, and it's Lutheran hymns that are interjected in between, and those are called chorals, which he utilizes. And the other thing that Bach puts into the Passion are things called arias. And arias are meditations or contemplations on the things that are happening in between the Gospels that Bach is writing himself. And so it's all in German. So obviously that's not a problem for you, but the English listeners, I would definitely 100% recommend that you parallel the German lyrics with the English, because it's not going to hit right unless you understanding what they're saying.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's not that easy to listen to in German because it's it's a little shaped by the surroundings. It's complex music, different pronunciation usually. It's filled, so you have to really pay attention. Syllables get held for a long time.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's really helpful to remember that they're actually saying sentences, so you can just, if you actually just pay attention, or if you even know the text, you can follow along really easily in German.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
You basically, if you're listening for the first time, you basically need the text, because it does not sound like they're speaking sometimes.
No, I agree. The text reading is almost necessary.
Yeah. So in the Passion, the choir is supposed to be the crowd. So when you hear when you hear that Peter is being lambasted, there's this section there where they're saying, weren't you with Jesus? Weren't you with Jesus? And so it's like,
yes,
you're in the mind of Peter, and there's like chaotic and really the tension builds. So the crowd is the choir, but the choir also sings the beautiful Lutheran hymns, and they also they sing the stuff to Christ. So there's a cool theological play here that he's doing, where the choir is the saint, but the choir is also the sinner, and this is really dynamic in Lutheran theology.
I really liked how also every time, let's say a main character, I'm using this very carefully here, is speaking, it's it's actually just one singer. It's with the arias or the recitative. It's just one person doing that singing.
Yes,
on that burden. So it actually it's reconstructing the scene almost.
Yeah. So my 2 favorite parts. The first one is the beginning. I think it's called Herr unser Herrscher. I think it's
Herr unser Herrscher.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually Herr unser Herrscher. You can hear how those are definitely coming from the same root. I would translate it as Lord or our sovereign, or Lord our ruler. But in English, you don't say, you say Lord as a title of God. But
yeah,
Lorder isn't really a word that exists.
It's basically saying Lord our God. as a, I guess, a direct translation, but
maybe, yeah. Herrscher is actually Herrscher is interestingly a more broad word because it actually is a very, very common way to describe almost any like direct authority. So like it doesn't necessarily have to mean king or or emperor. That's the most common way of looking at it. But you could like Herrscher does not really denote anything other except like authority or power. It can be like a president. You can say whatever, like Donald Trump or Joe Biden is the Herrscher of the United States. That wouldn't be necessarily wrong. It would just be a bit weird and archaic sounding.
Yeah, I guess the English equivalent would probably be like ruler or magistrate.
Exactly. That's why I said like Lord or ruler, because Herr at the same time is the German rendering of the tetragrammaton.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorites. There's piercing like dissonances from the oboes when it starts off. And it builds the tensions, and it's shifting the keys until it finally unleashes the chorus, where it's like very triumphant. They say, "Lord, our ruler," and it does it 3 times. And the pacing here is very deliberate. So like the first time, it's very very fast, and then the second time it's faster, and then the third one is very slow.
And I also love the swelling string section underneath, almost like building up the tension. Feels kind of like waves in the sea almost.
Yeah, and the chorals, they're sprinkled in there. It's very Bach-esque.
Yeah,
the way he does this. And what he's trying to do here is he's trying to shadow the resurrection, as Jesus died and he rose again by his own power. You'll have lyrics like, "I will ponder now on your holy passion." So the passion, and this is sort of indicative of Bach's work, is it's not merely entertainment's sake. It's not, like we said, it's not merely just an experiment on didacticism and music, but it's also for instruction. You're supposed to center in and hone on something that's higher than the frequencies and the composition that you're sensing, and is trying to put you into a more edified state. And this is, I think, where Bach's masterwork, where he understands music so well, is because he's hearkening on something like that.
Yeah.
And so Bach, there's a Bach analyst I was reading, and he says that there's some kind of like tormented figure that's being played out, because in the beginning there's like clashing notes, and the bass is ascending and the strings are ascending. The bass has like a leitmotif to it. The woodwind measures they're in half step for some reason. Like, it's painful. It's like a painful thing that's happening.
They sound so aggressive almost. It's so great. Yeah. It's grating is how I would put it. The bassoons and the oboes are are really grating.
And this like atonal, it's like almost atonal, but this thing, it doesn't resolve until finally the floods of the choir like enters. So you understand, and the choirs, like we said before, are the ones that accuse Peter and accuse Christ. So you understand that there's some kind of like churning dread that's going to come, and this is what sets the entire passion, like the rest of the work.
Absolutely.
And so my second favorite part is...
I was just gonna say before you move on, I also really like how that same part in Herr unser Herrscher still has that, when it's after the first time it's repeated, it has that it switches to major. And when I first heard that, I also found that to be a little jarring. I really didn't expect that. It's really beautiful though. It still uses the same instruments and like used in the same way too, but it's in major then for a moment, talking about how Christ has died for our sins, or how he will die for our sins. I'm not sure what the exact phraseology was. Yeah. And then it repeats from the beginning again with the really harsh ones. It really is like a foreshadowing of the death and the resurrection. Like,
Yeah, it's interplaced so beautifully
Yeah.
and masterfully. He understands like every dynamic,
Hmm.
how to sort of express this. And so my second favorite part, it's called, forgive me for this, Ik volge der gleichval.
Sorry, you need to write that in chat. I did not understand.
That's embarrassing. I might cut that.
I understood ich folge, but I didn't understood. Oh, gleich,
Folge.
yeah. Ich folge dir gleichfalls.
Ik volge der gleichval. Whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. It's here doesn't exist in English. Don't like beat yourself up for it.
So this is covering Jesus' arrest and then Peter's attack. And then the speaker here, he calls himself a fellow disciple, and this is obviously alluding to John, because John names himself that in the same gospel. He's like the apostle whom Christ loved. And the speaker here is exhorting the listener to follow Jesus. And but the events in the song, the spirit is that this is going to happen in an ordained way. So as it keeps going on, it's grammatically ascending within the lyrics. And so the narrative is that the disciple is afraid to go into the high priest's dwelling because of what Peter did. And this piece is typifying the resurrection narrative to reinstate Peter as a disciple when he betrays Christ. So in the aria, this horrible betraying is happening to Peter, to Christ. He's denying his God. But in the aria, Bach writes in into joyful steps. So there's a promise here that it's ordained for this to happen, and we know that Peter is going to be an apostle, and he's predestined to be a saint. And there's a promise that's written here that says that Christ is saying, "I will not let you go," and that's the performance of the Passion. This is what the Passion is meant to bring you into light in. It's not just some opera or piece for entertainment's sake, but like we said, it's an evangelical piece of art that's meant to edify the faith. And that's the reason why I would definitely exhort the listener to listen to St. John's Passion, for sure.
I second this, absolutely. I want to add, I still find it incredible that after all this time there hasn't ever been another Passion of the same quality. There just hasn't been.
Yeah.
You can argue with organ music, maybe, sure, whatever. There's probably multiple pieces that top that. Maybe something from Mendelssohn or something. I cannot think of another Mass or even Passion that can rival. Okay, maybe a Mass, maybe not Mass, but Passion. I can't think of another Passion that rivals the ones from Bach. I'm not aware of any.
I don't think there is one. Yeah, I think this is at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, okay, there people have definitely made some, and they're definitely good, right? But they're not good to a degree where you're like, wow, everyone needs to listen to this. They're just kind of
Yeah, and that's basically everyone's experience when they listen to this. It's just it encapsulates all of the senses, and
yeah, it's supreme.
It's hard to say that it's even subjectively good at some point.
No, I refuse language. I think this is objectively good.
Yeah,
it's the reason. Okay, I think something that's difficult about the whole subjectively and objectively thing is that taste can actually also be honed and improved. Believe it or not, taste is not just something you're born with, or that your particular situation allows just one taste catered specifically to you. A taste really is a kind of a muscle, a skill, really.
Absolutely, totally.
I mean, this doesn't mean, of course, I don't think I don't think the conclusion should be, okay, therefore we need to have enforced laws about art.
Right.
No, but we are in a time where people are too comfortable just, consuming the sloppiest, worst, and sweatiest pieces of art, and then like saying, oh, whatever, this is just like my taste. You can have your highbrow thing, nerd, and I'll have my like super Star Wars McDonald's Rick and Morty over here.
Yeah, and I think that's something I mentioned earlier, is that there was Bach bended the rules, right? So there was a flow of free-form thought, of free thinking that was applied to his music, but it wasn't in a way where it's so vulgar, of like being just like totally atonal gibberish.
Right. And even then, like, atonal doesn't mean dissonant either. People mistake this. Atonal is just talking about the key center and about the scale you're using.
Yeah, that's more so of like a meme now, where it's like the atonal is like totally gibberish music.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I think it's fine as a phrase to like say that, but it's not technically accurate. I think even atonal music can be really beautiful, and I mean beautiful in the like super traditional sense here too. By the way.
I mentioned it in the first one. It was atonal, but it was like you said, it was just put into like a state where it's trying to show a form. It's like very masterfully put in. But going back to what I said, there was freedom of thought, and like he understood how to bend the rules in such a way where you can still bring to the form of the object you're trying to bring to the audience without betraying any of the senses. Not betraying it, but actually honing it to an ascending state where you can understand it without even things like words or images.
Yes.
It's just like pure sound.
Yeah. I think pure sound is actually something I haven't fully developed thoughts on just yet. It's a subject that really, really fascinates me, and it's something I really want to explore. But it's also unlike let's say written text. I think there is still some kind of ambiguity to it that I haven't fully understood yet. But Bach is a super great way of trying to get closer to the core of it.
Yes, definitely.
Most of his music, I think, is probably going to be no, is it most? Is it fair to say most? No, this is hard to calculate. I have no idea what percentage of his music is instrumental as opposed to vocal. But let's just say a good part of his music is just purely instrumental. And it's really great to explore, because one of the things you will notice with Bach's music specifically, unlike, I'm sorry to throw shade at modern music. Modern music, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it has a very small vocabulary, a very short grammar, unless we're talking about the periphery. Like if someone comes with a counterexample, like, what about this music? I'm speaking generally here, okay? Modern music has a very small vocabulary and relies mostly on other effects, such as manipulating sounds or the text, the lyrics, to achieve an effect in the listener. Bach's music, however, especially his keyboard music, does not have this luxury. You just have the keyboard. The keyboard meaning the organ or the cembalo, the harpsichord, or even the pianoforte. Bach did touch one at one point. This restriction is kind of overwhelming, like in the eye of the modern person, because like how do you make that interesting? Like that's just like
exactly
a handful of sounds. And then going through Bach's music, I am in awe. I really am, with the incredible range of things he can cause in your soul by listening to this, all just on one instrument, unaltered, with the careful placement of these notes. And this relies on a grammar that I don't think, like, people need to get away from this idea, like that there's like some kind of prophethood going on. Like some people are selected by the Holy Spirit to be predestined to make a great art. Well, okay, maybe in a sense that might be true, but like it's not like it's not like he's like sitting on his desk, his eyes shoot open and they're like glowing, and the Holy Spirit like grabs his arm and like forces him to like write these notes. It's a lot of it is from the grammar that he's relying on. And the grammar is massive. The massive grammar, I think, is what makes it so makes it capable of depth. Because what is the result? You have many more inner combinations between elements. Imagine this is really easily comparable to language. You can imagine something great like Lord of the Rings, amazing book, really well written. And now imagine English is like losing like 500,000 words, and you have to try to make something like Lord of the Rings. It's not gonna be easy, is it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, in this example, modern music would be like you're allowed to like make the letters look crazy, like use all different kinds of fonts and colors in the letters to achieve some kind of effect, arrangement on the page. Sure, it might be interesting and everything, but if you have if you rely on just the pure text, it has a different kind of depth, one that I think is more subtle and therefore also more valuable. Sorry, not that the other one isn't invaluable, it's just less valuable. Like silver gold type of deal.
I would definitely agree that the I don't know, the 7 million songs that have been written have not been as condensed as the hundreds that Bach has written.
Yeah, I think that's what's mostly impressive about Bach, and I have this. What you have to understand with lots of composers when they are writing in a style, most of them, even Bach, mostly are writing in a style, and then within that style, you sometimes have a hard time telling apart mediocre composers, and then the geniuses, really, like the masters, those you can immediately like parse out, even if you are like unaware and like going through these genres. With most musicians, their best hope is, there will be a great example, specific genre. Only the super top of the peak of the mountain of composers or artists in general can actually like hope to have, let's say, a unique voice. Mm-hmm. And this might be harsh, like, because people get told like, oh, everyone has like a unique voice, but you're not born with a unique voice. It's something you actually have to like work for.
It's a muscle, yeah.
Yeah, a great example for this, in my opinion, would be something like architecture. Anyone could technically build, a house. Sure, that's not like, it's not to say like people are born incapable. I don't think so. But if you have like a unique vision for architecture, think of Minecraft. Think how like.
Yes.
No, sorry to bring in Minecraft, but like, you can tell like most people kind of suck.
Yeah.
And those that are like great at building oftentimes rely on a grammar, and usually you can easily tell they're working within a genre, and that's noticeable. And then only really the super top have like a unique voice, and the unique voice isn't something like born or bestowed upon them from God, even though maybe it might be. And I'm trying to highlight the fact on how this is reached. They didn't just, even if they are chosen by God, God doesn't just snip his finger and they wake up with this ability. God makes them work for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is this is a hope for everyone. Like, people can become geniuses, even if you're not born a genius. Think of what's his face, the guy who made the painting with the crazy blue colors, with the cathedral all swirly and stuff. The Starry Night. What's his name? Yeah, Van Gogh.
Oh, of course, right.
Yeah, he didn't start painting until he was in his 30s.
Right.
So that's what people need to keep in mind.
He also had like insane insecurities.
Yeah, exactly. He was super troubled. And he had no practice before that either.
Right. So, in conclusion, open your mind. Yeah, listen to some Bach.
Really, yeah.
Like if you just listen to like modern music or church hymnals or whatever, put on some Bach and try to like open your ear in a different way. Like not just casually listening, but like listening.
Yeah.
And you will definitely it's definitely an experience.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that too. Try like different types of pieces from him, because he has a very, very wide range of things. You can try one of his cantatas. They're pretty long. They're like 20 minutes, sure. But you can also try, one of his organ pieces, or from the Well-Tempered Clavier or something. They're pretty different. You might find something that is actually like super enjoyable, if you're lucky.
yeah, look around. Don't be afraid to like listen
Yeah.
to complex music or
Yes.
like, even if that's your thing, the more simpler stuff or the more
Yeah.
enthusiastic stuff. Yeah. Thank you, Apple Stream, for.
Oh yes. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Goodbye.
Goodbye.